Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our marking guidance session for GCSE Maths. Over to you, Mel.
Thanks, Amy, and thank you to everybody for joining us on this session. I will cover these as part of the introduction. I am going to go into a little bit more greater depth when it comes to them. But I'm conscious of the audience. We may have people that are seasoned examiners, some that are new to this. So having done this now for a good few years, we've kept the structure the same as in previous years, of which the previous sessions should be available on the YouTube channel from Pearson, but also the slides are available on the Maths Emporium. So in terms of these abbreviations, M's for method mark, P is for process mark, B is an unconditional accuracy mark, C is communication mark, and A is an accuracy mark. Not necessarily, for years I thought that was, it's A for answer, it's not, it's an accuracy mark. And the way this is structured is that I go through the general principles of marking, produce it, and then to support that, to exemplify what I'm going to briefly talk about at the beginning. So I will talk about where working is required, and then part of the what we go through, you will see an example where working is required. So I know that sometimes as I'm doing the general principles overview, people have questions and go, but what about this? I hope that most of those questions will be answered as we go through, and you'll start seeing us going through some students' responses. But I do always like to do a little health warning in terms of the practice and the difference between practice and theory. So why is it important we understand the marking principles? One is, there's a couple of schools of thought here. Some of you will want to mark your students' papers exactly as they will get marked in the real exam. And others will want to have a little bit of leeway in there. So we tend to mark really harshly as practitioners, myself and Christian, who usually does this and delivers this as on a hand-to-hand basis throughout the year. And the reason we do that is that we have that high barrier for students, and we're almost leaving a few marks in the tank as Brucey bonus marks that we know they'll get it in the real thing, but for now we want them to still be stretching for more and more marks. So that's the difference between what we do in practice and what happens. But it is important to understand the general marking principles so that when it comes to the review of marking, should you have students you want to review the marking post the real exam, or even you want to go to appeal, understanding these principles is important. So at the start of the every mark scheme produced, there is there's a 3 or 4 pages that go through the general marking guidance. So these are the principles on which most situations will fall within, but there's always exceptions with questions. But these principles are the first and foremost the rules of the road, I suppose. I don't expect people to, it's at this point that people will have questions. Bear with me because I've tried to find examples from the Summer 24 series to exemplify each of these, but I want to be explicit about some of these principles. So the first one that I always talk about is where working is not required, and where it is required. So in general, if it doesn't say show your working, prove, they will gain full marks. This is the prime example of where you may choose, in conjunction with agreeing with your head of department or your mat lead, that maybe for those kind of questions, specifically at certain times, so you might go, well, in year 10, we want to mark a bit harshly to make sure that they up their game. So even if it says full marks rewarded, where no mark working is shown, you may tweak that. But in the real exam, unless they are told, they will be given. And again, you will see examples of this in the examples we're going to go through. So where working is required, generally students will be given no marks. So a best value question, which supermarket should they buy their potatoes from? Just saying the farm shop isn't enough, even though the farm shop is, in quote marks, the correct answer. It will need to be with supported working. Choice of methods, you will see an example of. Crossed out work, you'll see an example of, I think. Yes, you will. Incorrect method. This is one to look out for in terms of where it is obvious that their answer has come through incorrect working. That's one I'm really conscious of. So when it comes to the marking a series, I will look at, see if there's any questions that I think, oh, they may have got that answer through fluke or luck, or just because they've made a mistake. It should be picked up through the markers. It's not a risk. So I would mark that as correct answer through incorrect working. Yes, I know in the real exam that may fall through the gaps. We hope it does, and we hope the markers pick it up, but it's not a risk I want to take with my students, so I will be picking that up. So just to be aware of that for certain questions. And last summer, there was a couple of questions where we were able to identify where that had happened on. It must have been enough scripts for the examiner's report to have picked up. I don't think there's any from this summer series that it's been identified as, oh, look out for this. Follow through marks. Again, they're exemplified on the mark scheme. You will see examples of this as we go through. It's not so difficult on GCSE where follow through marks, because generally the follow through marks come from a part A to a part B, i.e. they've used a calculator for part A, and then the follow through marks is allowing them to use their answer to part A and part B. But on A level, you have to work through using their incorrect answer. So just be aware of that one. ISW, so ignore subsequent working. And I will use a lot of acronyms, but the reason for those I use them is that I sometimes annotate, if I've got a particularly tricky script that I'm struggling to, or a particularly tricky questions that I'm marking, whether it's in a real series or with my students, I will annotate it with the shorthand. So ISW. Sometimes you see this a lot in a paper or over a series of papers in a sitting. So in some cases, not again, I've picked up some examples where it's appropriate to ignore subsequent working, and you'll see that in action. The linear equations, I've also picked up some examples because a few years ago, it would have been enough for people to say, oh, it's 4x plus 5, I'd see minus 5 on both sides. Now we need to see that that's correctly worked through. So I've picked some of those up. The use of exerted commas where their answer, the method is correct, but they've made an arithmetic error, that is allowed to follow through as long as, say, the volume of the cylinder is a correct method, but they've used the wrong answer because they've made a silly mistake. That gets worked through. And then a misreads, again, misreads are something that it's something I'm very hot on in terms of the difference between my practice and in theory. I'm aware of it, but in practice, when it comes to mocks, I don't really allow misreads. Because again, it comes down to that marking harshly. But all of those tweaks that I make, I'm not saying that's what you should do. It's not a decision we make lightly. It's something that over the years that we've honed. And the one I always quote is, for example, that if there's a line of best fit on if there's a scatter graph, use your graph to estimate. We don't, if their answers within the acceptable range, we will not award it unless there is a line of best fit, because we want to get them in the practice of the line of best fit. But again, that's our decision that we've made over the years. So some other abbreviations that you will see, or equivalent: CAO for correct answer only, follow through when it's appropriate, special case, dependent, independent. So there's some marks that you can award independent of everything else that's going on in the question, answers which round to, and then ISW for ignore subsequent working. I am then at this point going to pick up on the process mark. So when the new GCSE 2017 was launched, the Pearson had a new mark category, which was called the process mark. It is exactly the same as a method mark, with the exception that it's used for AO3 questions. So it's used for problem solving type questions. An assessment objective 3, which is the problem solving aspect of the GCSE. It is there because not all of the methods will be laid out in the mark scheme, because sometimes students have a weird and wonderful way of coming up with a route through a question that nobody else will have thought of out of 300,000 students. So they're there to specifically highlight, just be aware there could be other methods, and that not all of the methods are laid out in our mark schemes. And again, in practice, what that means is that sometimes they're the ones that you might escalate up to a team leader to say, look, I've not seen this method. What do you think? What should I award? And I'm just being really clear about it, where working's not required. And again, you're going to see examples of this. The correct answer should be awarded full marks unless it's clearly obtained from a wrong answer. But then if the answer's not correct, look at the working. So on the meatier questions, in terms of the practicalities, because I also like to, again, context, I don't know who's listening to this. Some of you will be new to marking, some will be, like I say, at it for years and be able to mark a paper in about 7 minutes flat. I generally will look at the answer on the answer line for the meatier questions and work backwards as to, is the working out correct? Yes, it is. And see where I can award marks, because the intention should be that we positively mark. So we don't go in there looking and thinking, where can I not give these marks? And I've already mentioned these, but they're just there in more detail about where working is required, and you need to be looking for those words, show that. Your working must be shown. If there's a correct answer in the answer line, unless it is supported, they will get 0. And like I say, I may apply that to where working is not required as well in practice, but know that when it comes to the real thing, anything they do score on those kind of questions, they're Brucey bonuses. And then I've already mentioned about the inverted commas. So the way this is going to work is we're going to go through each paper. And again, to manage expectations, because I am conscious of time, that we probably won't, well, we won't get through all 6 papers. If you consider that when you mark a paper, and if you've never marked, so you go through first of all, you go through familiarization, where you're given a load of questions just to familiarize yourself with the kind of responses you're going to get. and you're asked to feedback to your team leader about common responses where you think mistakes should be made, some clarification against the draft mark scheme that you've been issued with. And then when the formal mark scheme and then all of that gets, the system gets blanked out. So set back to 0, reset, so that anything you've entered doesn't apply. Then you get your formal mark scheme, the final version, and then you do something called practice. Then you do something for something called qualification. So you do practice where you mark a question and it tells you, no, the examination team or the lead team would have given that 3 marks, you've given it 2, and these are where they gave those marks, and then you can adjust your thinking accordingly. Then you do qualification. So for each question, and you might get a bank of, say, 20 questions, 15 questions, you then have to mark a load of qualification questions, 10 usually, sometimes 8. And you have to pass a certain standard to get through, to be able to mark on a live scenario, live setting. All of that can take you about 3-4 hours. And so to think we're going to be able to go through that level of detail for 6 papers would be unfeasible. So, and I always say we will get foundation 1 done, higher 1 done. We might get into higher paper 2, but then what's available to you on the resources is for you to download the rest of the presentation. And what is useful to do is below on the notes. So it produces a nice little pack. If you then print it notes pages, you end up to see the notes pages that relate to each question. So you can then see where specific marks would have been awarded and why. And again, you might want to revisit this when you come to use the 23 papers, because I also know that people might not be using these for a while. But I also like to start with giving you an overview in terms of the examiner's reports. So I'll let you read that, but some of the key things that came out of it in terms of things we can do to improve the numeracy skills, multiplication and division skills when working with integers, decimals, and fractions. Interpretation of problems involving ratio, particularly combined ratios or overlapping ratios, as I would call them. Knowing, stating, and applying angle facts, transformations, equations, inequalities, the processes for estimation. And interestingly, it did mention with emphasis of rounding a value to one significant figure. Equation of a line, understanding set notation, reverse percentages, encouraging students to set their working out using logical steps, and encouraging students to read the questions carefully so they understand what they're required to do. So that was quite interesting in terms of more specific, but that's included on the notes page for this slide. So there's lots more information. So we're going to go straight into, and it doesn't cover every question because some are just, it's either right or wrong. I've tried to choose questions that had something to say that in terms of linking to the general marking principles. So how much so we got Ryan buying 4 cakes, 2 identical tins of soup. The correct answer was £1.50. Just going to move you out of the way. And they've got the correct answer on the answer line. What is interesting, and the reason I chose this, is if you're aware of the correct answer through incorrect working, some of the things that were condoned, i.e. allowed. So you've got your 4 lots of £1.30. Then you've got the second process mark, but it was done in 2 steps. And And then everybody, I'm hoping, is screaming at me going, but they've done 7 take away 10, not 10 take away 7. That is condoned because it led to the correct answer. If that had given an incorrect answer, it wouldn't be condoned. And similarly, 2 divided by £3 is condoned because it led to the correct answer. So that one is awarded full marks. And I just thought that it's not something I want to encourage students. But if you think about, as you become a bit more experienced at teaching, and over the years, I would have stood there and thought, initially thinking, I don't understand how they've got that the wrong way round. But if you think about it, they've done the thinking, 520 plus 8, 180 is 7. That's that's in their heads. Oh, and we all know that they, obviously, because they got the correct answer. It's about how that's being processed, the order it's being processed. So we condone the writing, the reversed operation or the reverse numbers there, because it leads to the correct answer, because what it's done is it has implied the correct calculation. If they had written 2 divided by 3 and hadn't got an answer, they wouldn't have got that third process mark, and obviously they wouldn't have got the accuracy mark. So it is only condoned because it led to the correct answer. I thought that was really interesting to see that in practice. And again, what happens in practice and theory are 2 different things. The next student on the same question, I'll give you a couple of seconds to have a look at what they're doing there. Again, they get the process mark for 4 lots of £1.30. And these are real students' responses, albeit I've rewritten them so that we've hidden the student's identity. They get the first process mark for 4 lots of 130, albeit leading to an incorrect answer. But if you see the second mark, it allows us to the quote mark around the 520, because they have used the correct process, albeit given a wrong answer. So that's that general marking guidance about the use of inverted commas. And then the third process mark comes because they've used their therefore that has come from an incorrect answer and divided by 2. And again, it condones the use of a £2 sign there. And then obviously their final accuracy mark because they got the answer wrong. So we're not penalising them twice for getting 420 instead of 520. That would be really unfair. And then the last one of these examples to look out for is sometimes this goes, you look at it, and they've got 240 on the answer line, and there is a special case of B2, so that's 2 independent marks that suggests that there was enough students' responses there to have given £2.40 for it to be a common misconception. And you can see exactly what they've done. They've got to the 480 and then they've divided that by 2. So look out for those special cases, not always obvious. And again, you might think, actually, within practice, I'm not going to bother with the special cases, and then that would be a Brucey bonus. So yeah. Now this one, for those that have marked previously, bar charts and the use of suitable diagrams, and bar charts specifically, if you've marked the old 1380 spec, the rule, I'm not saying the rules are sometimes what is awardable and what isn't does change. So it's worth checking every time. So they have clearly not marked. Again, I'm going to move my pictures of you lot. There isn't anything on there to say whether it's Lena or Pavel. So there's no key, there's no dual bar charts. They have got 3 or 4 correct labels or a linear scale. So that scale is linear. And then they're correctly showing 13, 15, 13 and 12, albeit they're different widths. And then the final mark, which is a C1, a communication mark, it's not fully correct because in order to get fully correct, we needed correct bars for both Lena and Pavel, labels for days of the week, the correct scale, and we needed the scale, the vertical axis correctly scaled and labelled, and a key. So there's still lots of marks that students can get on these kind of questions. So they got M0, excuse me, C0, the other two, it is there, M1 and M1. So they got 2 marks. There's still plenty of marks available for students. Again, you might choose to do something different. Then we've got this one. They've clearly got a label for Lena and Pavel. They've clearly got 3 or 4 correct labels for days of the week. The scale must be present for the 3rd mark. And it's obviously not fully correct. So as soon as they lose one of those, they can't get the final 4th mark, which is a little bit disappointing. And the bars don't have to be equal width. And I know for some of you that might irk you, but we condone bars of an equal width. We also can go to condone where there's no gap or inconsistent gaps. And again, you might go, no, I want them to have equal width. I want them to have equal gaps if they've got gaps. That is entirely up to you, but knowing how it works in reality. Right, then we move on to question 9B, sorry. They start a method. So they've got a partial inverse. I'm just trying to work. So they've started with 28 and they've taken 10. But if they'd added 10, it could have led them to getting one of the marks, but they've actually just done exactly. So they understood it was inverse. So this is the bit, and some of you, if you look at that, you go, but they've inversed one of the operations, so surely they should get one of the 2 marks. No, because the mark scheme here clearly says they start the method. So the start of that method is that it needs to start with a plus 10, then a divide by 2. So just worth noting on that one, that it's not either or. They don't get 1 mark for either inverse operation. And the mark scheme, once you've done a few mark schemes, it says they start the method. They can get it if they've got the divide by 2, but the divide by 2 needs to be accompanied by the plus 10. Which to me, I thought, oh, that's a bit harsh, but that's what it says. It starts the method. So that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to pick up ones that aren't, because I don't want to treat you like I'm like a granny sucking eggs. So the ones that made me think. Question 10, we move on to writing the ratio. So there was something similar, and I like to include one like this because we need the clarity for people. And it says they write 24 to 26. And some of us might not notice the colon. So this one clearly got M1 for writing 24 to 36. Then they've got 2 to 3. However, it's worth noting, it doesn't say show you're working. So if they'd gone straight to 2 to 3, that would have given them full marks. So this is an example of where working isn't required. However, this next question, they clearly have written 24 to 36, but what they haven't done is written it as a ratio. So we don't see a ratio, we just see the numbers 24 to 36. So that actually doesn't attract the first method mark. And then as they followed it through, there's no equivalent ratio. So their accuracy mark is 0, so it is incorrect. Again, if this is about trying to instill students accuracy and that the detail matters. It does matter whether or not you include a ratio, a colon. Right, moving on to 11C. I thought this was really interesting in terms of just to show you where working is crossed out. Basically, if working out is crossed out, we ignore it. It's as if that working out is not there. And that's the best explanation I can give for it. We can, however, so in this case, that those crossed out incorrect brackets are not there. And what is there is correct. And that was the one that I just thought, oh yeah, I can visualize in my head. They've been crossed out, they're not there, which means I mark what is left. And in that case, if they hadn't been crossed out, so we had a correct answer and an incorrect answer, it would have scored 0 because there's a choice of answers, which comes under guidance note 3, where we've got a choice of answers. And again, I'm going to pick up on the choice of answers in a bit, where it leads to you mark it, you give it the lowest score. Right, question 12. This one, there's 3 process marks available, and an accuracy mark. So they're given 1 process mark for adding the 36, the 30, and the 14. However, they have clearly got that to 110, not 80. And as you can see there, the 80 is in quote marks, so we allow that 80 to be worked through the rest of the answer. So their 110 clearly comes from a correct process. They've divided it by 2. Then they've taken 2 lots of 4 off it, so they're allowed that 3rd process mark, but their accuracy mark is 0. So again, just gives you a bit more of an example of where the inverted commas. The next example of this same question, I really like this from a student, because I know how many of you sat out there, this will irk. That repeated equal sign, where mathematically some people will go, but it doesn't, 80 divided by 4 is not the same as 20 minus 8. It's not the same as 12 minus 2, which is not the same as 6. And I know that you purists out there will hate it. But that's not to say we should be penalising students. What we should be doing is bringing this up with students in our teaching to make sure that we're not doing those strings. So they first get the process mark because we see one sign of that. we then clearly see equals 80 divided by 4. But they're actually getting the process mark for 80 divided by 4, not for saying it equals 80 divided by 4. And then we've got your 20 minus 8 divided by 2, which gives us 6. Because in this case, the answer wasn't on the answer line, so we had to go looking for it. So we condone the incorrect use of the equal sign because we know that 36 plus 14 plus 30 does not equal 6 at the end. But that wouldn't be positively marking the students' responses. But it did make me chuckle because I thought, how many in-range maths teachers can I get? Right, the next one is question 13. There is the first process mark for getting the 10 and the 20 coins. And then there was the answer mark because 20 over 30 is equivalent to 2/3. So again, looking for those equivalencies. And if you note on the bottom right-hand side of the mark scheme at the bottom, it does say what other equivalencies were in terms of fractions and decimals that we can accept. So interestingly, 67% or 0.67 is accepted. That's not to say that that would always be the case, but in this question it is. So that's why that additional column is worth having with you. When it comes to, just as a nice little nugget, when it comes to printing the mark scheme, I like to print them 4 to a page, because otherwise it goes on for 30 odd pages and you end up flipping. And at least then a previous colleague used to print them sort of 16 to a page and print them on A3. So we'd have a big A3 sheet, which I thought was genius, but I've never managed to get around to doing that. The second version of this question, they've identified 10 and 20, but then incorrectly put 2 to 1. Because a ratio is not O equivalent, it's OE for probability. So we would be expecting a fraction, a decimal, or a percentage, ideally a fraction. And again, that might be a tweak for you to say, if they write a decimal or a percentage, we're not going to allow in our mocks, and then they get it in the real thing. So that's covered under the guidance point 8. And I'm hoping this is helping link back to those guidance, how to show you how the marking guidance principles do run through, apart from the exception where sometimes there might be added additional notes into that additional guidance. Right, we then move on to best value. And again, it depends on, you'll see these are process marks, so not all of the methods will be shown. There are tables there to help you shortcut your calculations. And it was interesting that I taught best value yesterday with my year 11s, and one of them wanted to give me how many potatoes per pound rather than kilos per pound for each quid he got, and that was his way of dealing with best value, whereas everybody else in the room, it was all about comparing the same, which is cheaper for the same amount. And both are allowable. So in this case, we've got, again, shows we are expecting values to be with this. It is not a case of saying a pack of 8. or a pack of whatever it is, a pack of 8 in this case. It needs to be supported. So you're looking for 3 values that you can compare. So we've got here process marks given because you can compare two packs. So in this case, we're comparing the cost of 12 pack batteries using the 4 pack and the cost of 12 pack batteries using the 12 pack, which was given in the question. But we haven't got a method to compare for all 3. So for all 3 packs, because what they've done is there's no cost shown for the indicated cost of the £5 for the 12 pack. Hang on. So although the conclusion is correct, let's go through this. We haven't got a correct process to compare the 4 pack. Is that the no? So we have the 5. So we've got the correct process because they've shown us where the £5.40 has come from. What they haven't done is shown us where the £5 comes from. So I was right the first time. So they've just put £5 for 12, but they haven't shown us how they got that. So in order to award that final, the accuracy mark, we need to have all 3. So they only get 1 mark for it, because that where they've shown us £1.80 times 3 is £5.40. That's almost where the first process mark came from rather than at the top. Then interestingly, on this kind of question, some students assumed that what the student wants to buy was 12 pack, was trying to get a pack of 12. What they have done is they've shown us the calculation for getting 4 packs of 3 is £5.40. So they get the first one for a process and an answer. But then they haven't shown us what they're going to do with the pack of 8. And there wasn't a conclusion, so there's no accuracy mark that was allowed. But there was no marks that was available for them to go, oh, you can have a pack of 4 and a pack of 8. As to why students thought that that would be a way of comparing best value, I don't know. So in this case, only 1 process mark. And this is probably a prime example about having a strategy for students when it comes to comparing things. How many things am I comparing? I'm comparing 3 things, so I'm going to split my page into 3. I'm producing interest for 2 accounts. Split your page into 2. Vertically, not horizontally, because then it becomes easier to see, becomes easier to compare your thinking. And it is a concrete strategy that I will bang on to students about. So again, just dropping that little nugget in. Then we've got question 17. This is one I did want to talk about. There is no mark available there because they haven't correctly expanded the single bracket. But then they have correctly deducted 10 from both sides to end up with the 8x on both sides equals 8. And because it's an independent mark, so we following the error of expanding the mark, the bracket, they are allowed, and then they correctly isolate the x to get by dividing by 8 on both sides. However, their answer is incorrect. And you'll see there what I thought was good about this mark scheme is that we had a bit more detail. For example, you will see 8x with the +10, the +10. And then we need to see 8x equals 8. So we need to see that followed through for that correct isolation. And I thought that was quite nice to see it shown. Same question. We've got correct expansion of the brackets. They've got 8x equals 28. So they get the second one. And then they get their 28 divided by 8, or equivalent of 3.5. So we could at that point, or have at that point, ignored subsequent working. Because the unsimplified fraction of 28 over 8, 14 over 4, 7 over 2, would give them the correct answer. So that gives you an example of where ISW kicks in, and they have at that point, and they're not penalised for incorrectly simplifying. And I thought that was quite a nice one to show you, because I think it is important you see see it in action. And then the last question on this paper, I believe, was the inequalities. They'd obviously written more than, but that doesn't impact on what they're doing. But they got 0 because we needed to have seen, they indicated -5 on both sides, but in the subsequent line, the minus 0.5x has then incorrectly become 0.5x. So in order to get that first method mark, we need to see it correctly evaluated. So had the second line been minus 0.5x, they could have got that first method mark. So then there's no full method to solve the inequality, so they don't get the second mark, which then leaves them not getting the accuracy mark. So we're just as, again, interesting to note that where we see the intention to add or subtract, we're looking for all the terms that should not be acted upon to remain unchanged, and the term being removed by the action. So again, I thought this was brilliant to see this enacted in the mark scheme, and it's probably a while since we've seen that. So we condone arithmetic errors on the other term, providing these have changed. So in this example, we looked for the 11 to have changed and not become 16. So there is a lot more detail coming through in those mark schemes. And I think some of that comes through from the feedback we give, saying, or the common questions that come up. Then we get into some crossover areas. So this is the start, the higher tier. There's no marks given for this. So whilst we clearly see 4n in the workspace, we have to mark their answer on the mark line, the final line. And they are ignoring the fact, so this is an incorrect answer, despite them having written in the workspace 4n plus 4. So there are no marks, because they've clearly shown I am choosing that it needs to be a 1n, not a 4n. The second one of this is that there's one unconditional mark available because they've put 4n plus something. I hope that makes sense. Give you an example of a fully correct answer. Again, this is one where students are not penalised, even though that mathematically some of you will be cringing, a bit like nails on a whiteboard or on a board, that they haven't put their number into a mixed number. They weren't asked to. It was just work that out. Mathematically, what they've done there is correct. So they get full marks. The mark scheme does say 32 over 15. They get full marks for that. And again, this is one where we can ignore subsequent working, which I then found a question where a student had done that. They got the 32/15, but then have incorrectly converted it to a mixed number. And I thought that was quite nice just to find that. And again, it's about enforcing with students, or reinforcing the message with students that you weren't asked to do a mixed number, so why are you doing it? Everything you need to know is in that paper. Then we got to the estimation question. I mentioned about rounding to 1 sig fig. It's not always appropriate to round to 1 sig fig. In this case, you need to check what the guidance says. So this one, they have rounded to 1 sig fig, and the guidance does say for this condone 0.81 rounded to 1. And then the second one, to find the total amount, i.e. the distance. So they were given the second mark for that, but their final mark was not given, and again, because they'd rounded 0.81 to 1. So it's not always, in that case, it was 1 sig fig, 0.81. And then this is interesting. So this one was wrong. And then if they'd rounded one number up and one number down, which they have in this case, the explanation must mention both answers. So we would have expected them to say, oh, I don't know, because one number's rounded up, one number's rounded down. However, from experience, I'm not saying it would never happen. Some students may or we should question, surely it would be a definitive over or underestimate, because that's what the question's asking. Is it an overestimate or an underestimate? And if you've done, that should have questioned the fact they've rounded one up and rounded one down. And again, the second answer, a second example of that, they've rounded, so they're able to get 2, but they're because they've used 0.81 rather than 0.8. The final answer is not awarded. And again, we would expect it to see both numbers rounded. Right, that covers the foundation and crossover. I am really conscious of time. Oh, conscious of time. So the higher paper, I am going to go through a few of these. Like I said before, look at the notes below the presentation. Because I just want to pick up a couple of the other exemplars, the marking principles. So, for example, this one, work out if it's fully correct, so they get everything. But we would have also accepted it if it was a fraction. Then we've got this. So the correct answer's on the answer line. That is what we award it for. They've obviously, and for this one, what I wanted to say was, had they made an error, we have seen a correct answer at 2 4/5. So if they had made an error in converting the 4/5 to 0.8, we would have ignored subsequent work in there. So in that case, they got the full marks. Histograms, I think this is worth noting. The first mark was because they've got 2 correct bars, or for at least 3 of those frequency correct. And when you look at those frequencies, the 4 should have been 3.20, 20 divided by, the 4 should have been 2, I think. It should have been one of the frequency densities is incorrect. They've only shown calculations for 3 of them, and we've got to encourage students, because even if their frequency density is incorrect, their final answer, but they've shown, even using the bus shelter, they can pick up some credit for these questions. Yeah, because they haven't done 20 divided by 10, they've done 20 divided by 5 by the look of it, but they haven't shown that they're doing 20 divided by 10. Then we've got expanding triple brackets. These are so easy to mark incorrectly. So, because not all of the combinations, so they could have expanded for the first one, the first 2 brackets, the second and third, or the first and third, and only needed 3 of those terms to be correct. But here all 4 are correct. But the method is not correct. We would have expected to see 6 terms there. We've only got 5, which meant that their final answer was incorrect. But then looking at doing a grid method, they've expanded the first 2 brackets correctly. 3 of the 4 terms are correct. And the X term is incorrect. No, that's the X squared term is incorrect. Yeah, because it should have been 6x squared. But then they followed that through. So, and again, because 5 of the 6 terms are correct, following through from their first product, they were able to, but then their final answer's wrong. So they're not getting penalised twice. There's only a few more on the higher paper. Worth knowing that we will accept, or was accepted, that 1 square root 7 is correct. We all know that. So then 8 as 2 root 20 scored no marks. The mark was only awarded for 6 times 50, 16 times 5, root 16 times root of 5, or 4 root 5. So not any other combination. And then obviously the final mark was wrong, so they got that wrong. I've then chosen 3 questions here, because I thought that one is recurring decimals, because this came up last summer. Last summer, there was a requirement to have written 0.15 ... and when you look, it does say 0.1515. So it is clearly shown as a recurring figure for the start of it, of either of those. But in order to get the second method mark, they needed to have a correct method for both recurring decimals. And that caused some confusion last year about what's showing it's recurring. But the mark scheme is clear about, in terms of that it needs to look like this. Then we've got this one. They've got it down to, they've got two correct. They've converted them both to recur to fractions. However, they've then left it, got an answer of 12.5. It is not 12.5. So their final answer is incorrect. What they do have is two correct fractions of 22.5 over 99 and 5 over 66. So that they're able to get that. This shows you at no point, it's an answer of 2.5. No working is required. But the final answer is correct, so they get it. Whether or not you choose to do that in reality is a different thing. All of the other papers are detailed for you to go through at your leisure, and I would love to spend another 2.5 hours going through this with you. There is the notes have got a lot more detail. It doesn't include every question, but it does include something on every paper. As you can see as I'm clicking through it. And I did say that you're never going to get the time to go through it all. There's some more email addresses for people to contact if you've got any queries. Look at the extended maths certificate. I love this qualification. It's an alternative level 2 qualification for your high achievers. Podcast, if you listen to nothing but podcasts, as do I. All this will now go up on the PD Academy.
Thank you again, and enjoy your evening.